That's a big fish.
What is going on, guys? Buggy with Chaways. Welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to tell you guys everything that you need to know to go out and target big bull reds. These are one of my favorite game fish to catch here in the Chesapeake Bay, and want to make this video as sweet and simple as I can and give you the best tips and techniques that I have and use to go out and catch these fish. I'm going to be talking about fun facts on bull reds, where to locate these fish, understanding different baits and lures, and ultimately the best gear and tackle when going out and targeting these fish. So I hope this video helps you guys out. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, I appreciate if you hit that button. Let's get into it. All right, so bull reds, bull drum, redfish, whatever you guys want to call them. That is such a popular question of what is the difference between a inshore redfish or a bull. And the biggest difference, obviously, first off, is just their size, right? So an inshore redfish is typically going to be anywhere from maybe up to 30 inches or so. Anything under that is more juvenile size. And these inshore reds typically stay relatively close to where they're born. So it could be inshore inlets, rivers, marshes, pretty much relatively kind of 5 to 10 miles is the rule of thumb of where these inshore fish, these redfish, stay. Now on the other end for bulls, these are much more sexually mature, larger fish. You know, the criteria for a bull kind of really varies based on where you're at. Kind of in Virginia, the rule of thumb is kind of 40 plus inches is considered a bull. I know guys in Carolinas and down in Florida and in the Gulf Coast, it's a little different. Some are more, some are less. But the biggest difference, really, first off, of course, is their size. So a big factor in just understanding bulls and their nature, what they're thinking, is they migrate when they spawn, right? And ultimately spawning is dictated on colder weather, and based off that these fish are up and down the coast, this is going to vary where you're located. Now typically spawning here in the Chesapeake Bay takes place in later September, like really October, down in the Carolinas, and then further south you go in Florida is typically kind of later October into November, maybe in December. And then those guys in Florida to Texas, the Gulf Coast, is really kind of late November, December, sometimes into January. But really the migration and when these fish are spawning is going to be dictated by the colder weather. So where you're at, understand the water temperatures, where these fish are moving, what they're looking for. And something that I really love about when these fish are spawning is they get super, super aggressive. Spawning makes these fish very exhausted, but it makes the bite very aggressive because their metabolism jumps up, they get very hungry. It's one of my favorite times to fish for these bulls. Now I know targeting these fish during the summer is really popular for us up here in the Chesapeake Bay. One of my favorite times to go out for these guys is later summer, early fall. And like I said, that spawning time frame gets these fish very, very aggressive. So understanding where these fish are moving, what they're looking for, is the first step when going out to target these fish. All right, so now that we talked about some fun facts and knowing a little about the nature of bulls, the next part of this video I'm going to be talking about is understanding where to locate these fish. So this sounds like a very generic answer, but the two ways you're really going to be targeting these fish is on top of the water. If you're sight casting, if you're on a tower, seeing these big schools come by, and then that's when you're gonna be throwing a bucktail, topwater popper, live crab, bunker, whatever it is. And on the other end, you're gonna be bottom fishing for these guys. So I know me saying topwater and then bottom fishing is kind of very vague, but I wanna provide a little more clarity in what I mean by that. So topwater ultimately is when these schools are going to be obviously right on top or a foot or so under the water. And this is a great time, one of the funnest if you have the opportunity, if you're on a tower or if you're on a boat and see these schools, to cast on these big schools. But what's most importantly is understanding you never want to cast right on top of these schools. You want to cast off a little bit off of them so you're not spooking them, and then you can be throwing a topwater popper, you can be throwing a bucktail, and we'll get into those baits later. But the first place you're going to be locating is trying to understand where these fish want to be, right? So tidal movement is very important. They're going to be looking for bait. So another big thing, just like cobia fishing, if you're going to be looking for birds diving, you're looking for bait popping, that's a huge start when you're targeting these fish on top of the water. And now on the other end, if you're bottom fishing, there's multiple different things that you want to be looking for. So just in regards to location, what's really popular is structure, rock jetties, docks, drop-offs, and flats. And ultimately, what these fish are looking for, just like any fish, is bait, right? So if you're bottom fishing for them, you can use bucktails, you can use live bait, crab, cut bait, and we'll get into bait and lures later. But understanding where these fish are going to be, and what's gotten very, very popular in the past couple years when bottom fishing for these is side scanning. And ultimately, side scanning gives you the sonar imaging of the side of the boat, but the bottom of the ocean, the bay where you're fishing at. And this has become very popular in the past couple years, especially up here in the Chesapeake Bay, because when these bulls are in these massive schools, you have really good imaging and be able to distinguish where those bulls are at. And that's a great opportunity if you're throwing cut bait, live bait, you're throwing some type of paddle tail or a bucktail. So really the biggest two spots that you're going to be looking for is top water, and then at the bottom, looking for structure, looking for bait, and understanding where these fish are moving is going to be the first start. All right, so we've talked about fun facts on bulls. We talked about location, kind of where to target these things. Next part up is probably what everybody's going to be most excited for. One of my favorite parts is understanding the best bait and lures to use. And this is going to vary, of course, if you're fishing for these bulls on top or the bottom. But the first portion I'm going to talk about is top water. Now, top water, when you're fishing these guys, you're going to come across these big schools, which is really exciting. And there's really kind of two main genres of lures that people use. And the first one is a top water popper. This is a 4-inch, 2 treble hooks with a bead in the middle. Has the recessed mouth, nose area where you tie your leader off. And I really love throwing the top water poppers for these bulls, because ultimately what this lure is going to do is cause a huge splash, pop, and vibration on top of the water that's getting the bull's attention. And now something that's really important, regardless if you're throwing top water popper or a bucktail that we're about to get into, is you never want to really throw these right on top of the schools, because a lot of times that'll spook them and they'll dive down. Sometimes you might get a bite, but my best recommendation would be try to cast off, maybe a couple feet off to the circle of the schools, if you will. That ultimately will still generate a ton of commotion, vibration, and that top water splash is gonna get these fish biting. And the other most probably popular lure to use when top water fishing for these guys is a bucktail. So this is actually a 2 ounce, but I'd probably recommend throwing a 1 ounce bucktail. And then there is a 5-inch grub on this. And just kind of like cobia fishing, bull reds love bucktails. And how you retrieve this is going to kind of vary depending on how aggressive these fish are. But typically once you throw this bucktail, you're going to start retrieving pretty fast, and you're going to do a lot and very quickly raising your rod up and down, giving this bucktail a very realistic look. Now, a lot of times you might have a bull that comes up and kind of follows it, and you're going to maybe want to let it sit there for a second and twitch it a couple times. But the biggest thing is two things. One, you don't want to throw this and just let it sink down when these guys are at the top. And two, you don't want to retrieve it too fast, right? So it's kind of that happy medium. And sometimes if these schools are really close, you can see these bulls. But most importantly, retrieving relatively fast, raising that rod up with twitches to make this bait look as real as possible. All right, so I talked about understanding top water when fishing for these. The next portion I'm going to be talking about is when you're bottom fishing for these. And like I said a little bit earlier in the video, how we fish and target these bulls has really kind of changed the past couple years with the development of new and better technology. So it's really popular right now using side imaging, side scanning, whatever you want to call it, to target these fish. And that's typically what I do a lot when I go out for these fish. I fish a ton for bulls at night, which I really like doing. And I will go on a lot of structure that we have up in the bay. And the side imaging ultimately gives you a better view and a wide variety out from bottom of the boat, where you can really target these large schools of bulls. Once you come across one of these big schools that are on the bottom, that obviously changes what exactly you're throwing and or how you're throwing it. So the same way of that we throw a bucktail on top of the water, this is kind of my #1 go-to even when I'm bottom fishing for these fish. This is a bucktail. Again, this is a 2 ounce. I'll throw typically a 1 ounce, 2 ounce tops if I'm throwing top water, because obviously I want to keep that relatively close to the surface. But when I'm bottom fishing them, I don't really use anything less than a 2 ounce. You could go up to a 3, 4 is probably a little too big. But once you find these fish, it can be on your side imaging. You're going to throw these bucktails in a little differently of how you're retrieving on top of the water. You want to first off make sure this hits the bottom and or relatively close when you're retrieving. It's kind of a little more of a slower retrieve than top water, and some really big raises of your rod and bringing this bucktail up and down. Now I know some people like to bottom fish with these relatively fast, like really quick jigs. and kind of letting it sit in real big pops. Now, I don't know if there's necessarily a right or wrong, but through my experience, the best way when targeting these is casting out a relatively kind of slower retrieval and those big raises up and down in the rods. And typically, for me, those bulls hit the most when you raise it and start to drop is when those bulls hit. But understanding, one, when you find those fish, a bucktail, any type of grub, or a large paddle tail is a really great option when bottom fishing. All right, so the last way that you can really fish for these guys is with a live or cut bait on the bottom, which is very popular, really kind of anywhere across the mid-Atlantic, up and down the coast, down in the Gulf. And there's so many different options that you can use, but my personal favorite, this is a secret, and I know I'm putting this out here, is I love throwing bluefish. If you can catch them live, even better. If you got it frozen, it is what it is. But I love bluefish because they put out a really great scent. They're a very oily fish, as we all know, which really gets those bulls biting. I've caught my PB, a huge citation, using bluefish. If I'm bottom fishing, that's what I like to use most of the time. If you don't have bluefish, another really popular fish is large mullet. It can be croaker, or we have blue crabs that are very popular, of course, up here in the Chesapeake Bay. Those are some of your biggest and probably most common baits. Live, if you can get it, that'd be great, but cut bait as well when bottom fishing for these. All right, so the last part of this video I'm going to be talking about is understanding the best gear and tackle when targeting bulls. Now, this can be very subjective. I know people might use something a little differently, but in my opinion, this is the best overall setup when targeting these bulls. So this is a 7-foot medium heavy fast action rod, the 6000 series reel. I typically throw, this is 60-pound braided line, and then I like throwing 50-pound fluorocarbon leader. Now again, this might vary. I know some people might like to use something a little bigger or a little smaller. I've used 5000 series before. I've even caught one on a 3500 series, which I have no idea still how I landed that. But I like 6000. To me is the most comfortable. I personally wouldn't really go anything under 5,000. You want to be able to really control these fish. They're so powerful and strong. I think once you get under 5,000, it just makes things really tight in regards to really how much you can fight that fish without tightening that drag down too hard and breaking the fish off. And I think a 7-foot medium heavy, again, fast action rod is a great rod, one just for bottom fishing, but also when you're jigging for these fish with a topwater popper, bucktail on top. It's light enough where you can jig fast, but it gives you enough power and strength still to fight these fish. In regards to line, like I said, all I fish is braided line. This is 60-pound braided. I will go probably to 50, which is the lowest that I would recommend. And then in my leader, I like throwing fluorocarbon, and typically throw 50 to 60 pound as well. But understanding that what fits your needs best. If you want something a little bigger to give yourself more power, there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to go something smaller and have some of that excitement of really trying to land a fish, there's nothing wrong with that either. But I think the overall best setup is kind of really a 7-foot medium heavy rod, and a 6000 series is going to be the best option to go out and target these fish. All right, guys, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and hopefully I was able to give you guys some great tips and techniques to get out in the water and land these awesome bull redfish. One of my favorite game fish to catch. So again, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you're not already subscribed to Try Ways, make sure to hit that button. I'd appreciate it. I'll see you guys on the water.